Good morning, everyone. As Nicole mentioned, my name is John Blanchette with Medmood Canada. I'd like to welcome Chief Clifford White with, and I'm going to have struggle with the pronunciation myself, Haisla First Nation, and as well, Michael Eddy, Indigenous Relations Manager with LNG Canada. Just a bit of a lead up, and I'm not going to claim to know everything about the project because it's been going on for far too long. It's well before my time. And I think I'd like to have Mike start off with a bit of an introduction to the project and how it came to be.
Sounds good. Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Pleased to be here with Chief Cliff White of Haisla Nation. Hopefully I said that right. I think I did. Yeah. Crystal Smith from Haisla Nation was supposed to be here today as well, but unfortunately she's sick and isn't able to fly, so Chief White and I will manage with John. So, my name is Michael Eddy. I'm the head of Indigenous Relations for LNG Canada. I've been with the project for almost 7 years, so from the early stages in working in the Indigenous Relations team. LNG Canada is a partnership of 5 companies, Shell, KOGAS, Petronas, Mitsubishi, PetroChina, working together to build a liquefied natural gas processing facility, an export terminal, and marine facility in Kitimat on the traditional territory of the Haisla Nation. And we'll be shipping this liquefied natural gas through the coastal waters of BC to the international waters heading over to Asia. So we pass by or through the territory of the Haisla Nation on the way to markets overseas. We take gas from the northeast of BC. Coastal Gas Link, which is a separately owned and operated pipeline, is bringing the gas to our facility where it will be cooled to minus 162, becomes a liquid, and then is shipped overseas. So that's a bit of a background on the project.
Thanks, Mike. Chief White, you've been involved in this project since day one. Can you tell us how you first heard about the project and how you were approached by LNG Canada, and maybe some of the process involved in your community? No, yeah, please, yeah.
Sim giget, sigid manana, kabawalsik, skolum doersu samorget imlacha, sagalum doersu, Blackfoot Confederacy and Treaty 7. Chiefs, matriarchs, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the Blackfoot Confederacy and Treaty 7 for allowing me to do this work on their territory, and which is important work, and it's also for us to acknowledge our people. Whenever we went to another nation, we always made sure that we introduced ourselves and let them know that we were doing work within their territory, and I really do appreciate the work that they for us to be doing here on their territory. The LNG Canada, I think it was about 6-7 years ago that we initially touched base with them. They met with our hereditary leaders. We have 23 hereditary leaders, of which I'm one of them. And we also have the matriarch. Our matriarch are the ones that actually, if they don't like what we're doing, they can actually disrobe us. So the matriarch have a very strong role in the process, as well as our elders in behind that. And so we work directly with our elected chief and council. And so our elected chief and council, if you can appreciate the fact that they're responsible for the reserve areas that has been designated to them by us, by the way. I'm the chief councillor, so that has been designated to us by the former Indian Northern Affairs Canada and now the Indigenous Services Canada. And we recognize that because if we just take a look at our reserves, we'll probably come up with anywhere from 3 to 7% of our original territories. So the territories are, 100% of the territories are governed by our hereditary leaders. So it's important for us on our governing table that we continue to respect that, and we do. We have the larger table that makes that distinction. So at the very beginning with LNG Canada, we introduced them not only to the Chief and Council or administration, but also with our hereditary leaders. And the long-term pieces is so important to us. It's not necessarily the project, because the project, it's what, 40 years? You know, it's half your lifetime, half our lifetime in terms of it's going to come and go, and there's a whole bunch of other projects as well within our territory. You know, mining, aquaculture, silviculture, forestry, you name it. There's all kinds of other projects. So we don't want to just focus on the projects themselves, but with our people, through our hereditary system, we want to make sure that our people are looking to the seventh generation of those of our children's children yet to be born. So we're looking at that, and when our hereditary met with LNG Canada, they really wanted to make sure that they're very much aware of our traditional cultures and making sure that they became not only being aware of it, but knowledgeable about how we operate and how we do business. So many thanks to LNG Canada for actually listening to that process. Pretty much from day one, they came in and we started looking at legacy projects. If we're going to get into projects with them, it's going to be legacy projects, long-term. So we started looking at our children yet to be born, which is, you know, those of our women who were not only pregnant, but also looking at our current children and how do we relate with them in terms of LNG Canada. So we looked at that, and we're now in the process of building a daycare center, because a lot of our students and our workers needed a place to have their children. And so daycare is pretty much a fairly large piece, along with Aboriginal Head Start, to make sure that our children get a good leg up as far as education is concerned. And the second piece with regards to not only education, it's our people have a lot of challenges on coming through the system. And I won't go into the history as to why we're like that, but just to note, you know, the residential school, the 60 scoop of Indigenous people right throughout the country. And so those kinds of pieces, a lot of our people, including myself, are having to live through today. Many of our older people don't want to talk about it because it's pieces that they feel is harmful for the younger generation. So it's those socio-economic pieces that we want to ensure that if we're going to develop a partnership with LNG Canada, we also have to take into consideration a lot of those historical impacts as well. And not putting all the burden on LNG Canada, but also with our other partners in the other industries, as well as the federal and provincial governments around how do we start developing reconciliation between our community and our partners. So right now, I think for now, I'll just leave it at that as to where we're at with LNG Canada. There's a lot of good work that's happened. LNG Canada has been one of the very first companies that we haven't had a problem with. And it may be the turn of the century in terms of how the expectation of business is to be working with our people. And it's LNG Canada looked at the legacy piece and pretty much the next day committed to an investment within our nation to look at our children, our youth, and not only with our children, our youth, but also with the adults and our elders on how they could work and make a difference within the lives of our people. So that makes a huge difference for us. So I would very much prefer to actually hear more questions from you than me standing up here talking. So I look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff White. Question for you, Mike. With so many LNG projects on the table along the coast, just recently we had a cancellation of Steelhead, for instance. What can you tell us, or what can you actually tell the country, because a lot of Canada's watching what's happening with LNG right now. What can you tell other companies about what you guys did right as opposed to what maybe they did wrong?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. And I think, Cliff, you spoke to it a little bit, but it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. I mean, I think for me, it starts with building a relationship. As cliche as that sounds, it's about investing the time into actually trying to build something meaningful. So sitting with Chief White, meeting his community, sitting with Hereditary when we're invited up, talking about the project, understanding, maybe even before we talk about the project, just understand the community, right? You talked about Githatla's processes and really working to understand what the interests and concerns are of the community in a way that they feel that maybe they can trust us and that we're actually sincere in what we're doing and that we want to understand, what you're worried about and work to mitigate that. And we could talk a little bit about shipping or what we've done in that area, but also then how your community can come to support the project, right? What are they looking for? So is it something around education and training? Is it something around daycare for people who are working? Is it about contracting opportunities? What is it that your community, and as you say, the children of your children want in terms of the opportunities, and how can we work to address that and provide that? So really it starts with, before you even talk about the project, at least in our case, build a relationship, right? Try and build the foundation upon which you're going to have the discussions around the project and what the impacts are and what the benefits can be. And just focus on that sincerity, right? Approach it just because we know we're in your territory. We're there for 40 years, hopefully more. And not only do we need to have a positive relationship with you, because that's just the reality, we also want that, right? And so if we approach it in a way that we see this project as providing an opportunity to build a positive relationship with your community, with Indigenous communities, and help move the dial on reconciliation, I think that's how we've tried to approach it, and that's what I'd pass on.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Chief White, there's been some negativity surrounding the project as well. And there's been some comments or some movement made by the hereditary system in your region. Do you think that's repairable? And how do you, give me your opinion on how that's going to move forward?
I think the situation is different for each region. We are having some challenges at the Wet'suwet'en front. We're a Githatla nation, and so very much like I wouldn't come in here and tell the Blackfoot Confederacy how to run their business, and they wouldn't do that in our territory as well. We wouldn't assume to go in and tell Gitxsan, Wet'suwet'en how to do the business within their territory. So the work that needs to be done with Coastal GasLink and the Wet'suwet'en people are pretty much up to the Wet'suwet'en people to reconcile that between themselves. However, having said that, it doesn't make my job any easier. I do a lot of work with the provincial government. I'm the chairperson for the First Nations Advisory Committee to the province. I also work with the federal government on ensuring that people like LNG Canada we have some policies in place at the provincial, federal levels to ensure that the inclusion of Indigenous people throughout BC and throughout Canada are a part of those major projects. So can we reconcile the differences between Wet'suwet'en and Coastal GasLink? It's possible. And where that is, it's not in the business license. You can have an FID, final investment decision, and you have your business license to move forward. You have all of the funding to move forward. But if you don't have the social license, which is what LNG, my apologies for that. That's $5 to somebody. If you don't have the social license, which is the other half of the equation, so all of the companies that are here in the room today should understand that social license piece. So when you're looking at developing a business with Indigenous communities, you have to keep that in mind, because to me, that's the other 50% of your license is the social license. If you don't have that, the potential is that it will not move forward. We've seen a company, a fairly large company, international company within our area, have FID, and at the end of the day weren't able to do their work because they didn't have the social license. So the work that LNG Canada has done with our nation and Haisla has, in my mind, second to none on coming in very early, very much at the beginning stage, and start developing that relationship with us, even to the point where Andy Calitz, who is the CEO for LNG Canada, came in and we offered him some seal meat and some woolakan grease and part of our traditional foods, and the table was set with nothing but traditional food. So it wasn't the kind of menu that we're all accustomed to outside of our community. So and he did try them. He did which part of what our communities will actually put you up to as well. Come in and see how we live, see how we actually operate internally as a society. And we've had some pretty good times, and we've had some very tough times at the negotiation table as well. But we've been able to work things through, and still working things through on working together. So with the Wet'suwet'en piece, we're able to work with the provincial government on talking about how can they work with the Wet'suwet'en people on reconciliation? How can the federal government have an impact on that? So for the leaders, the Indigenous leaders here in this room, recognize that I wish that I had Michael's job because I can focus on a particular thing. But when you're running a community, everything comes to your table, as the Indigenous people here in the room will attest to, whether it's alcohol, drugs, infrastructure, sewage, housing, schools, you name it, policies, working with the provincial, federal governments, everything comes to your table. And you're expected to respond to each and every one of those. So the job of elected chief and council and hereditary council is not easy. It's very costly, and people don't look at the cost a lot of times. And so that's one of the things that we worked with LNG Canada on as well. How do we cover those administrative costs of doing business? So it's because, like even getting here today, for example, how do you cover the cost of travel and accommodations and those kinds of things, rather than just leaving it to the First Nation community, because a lot of times the First Nations communities don't have that kind of resources to be able to do that kind of work. So Just know that the work of the Indigenous communities are, I don't know how a lot of us actually do it, and to try to deal with two different cultures. You know, we're dealing with not only our Indigenous culture on how to maintain that, but also learning very quickly, how does the government work? How does the provincial government work? How does the federal government work? What's the culture of the organizations that's coming into our nations and wanting to negotiate with us? So a lot of that is not only learning, but it's also teaching as well, teaching our ways as well as learning the ways of the corporations and the governments. So the challenges are there, and I work on a regular, pretty much daily basis to try to work and show the positives of where our Indigenous people are. But at an earlier session, I heard about the environmental impacts. That is second to none for Indigenous communities. You know, you look at the maps and you see the beauty of the land, but really, when you start poking into the ground, our people are right attached to the land. We have spirits for everything that we encounter, which we call noch 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 noch. It's the spirit of the land, the spirit of the water, the spirit of the air, the spirit of the minerals. And whenever we touch something of that, it's our tradition to actually not only to take what's there, but also to give back. So how do we give back to all of those resources that we're extracting? You know, how do we replenish Mother Earth where she's sustaining us? We're taking a lot of resources out of her. You know, the salmon, the trees, the oil, gas, you name it. Gold and silver, and forests, it's just almost endless. So how do we replenish that for the seventh generation yet to be born? So those are the kind of challenges that we look at our table, at our hereditary table, and our elected chief and council tables. And every one of the Indigenous leaders here in this room, including our Métis our brothers and sisters, have to look at those things as well, because that's the mandate of our communities, to ensure that we don't harm Mother Nature. Because, you know, for those of you who may know sweat lodges, it's like going into the womb of Mother Earth. You know, and so if you put yourself there, just to understand where Indigenous communities are coming from, and the spiritual connectedness that we have, not only to each other's, but everything that we're touching on the ground, and the things that we can and cannot see. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Thanks.
I just wanted to add, I talked a lot about what we did in terms of establishing the relationship. I think on a personal level, I feel even more pressure now because we have these, you know, you make these commitments based on this relationship that you've established where you understand what a community's concerns are, what their hopes are, what their interests are. Now you have to deliver, right? So it's even more intense now, I would say, than it was a couple years ago. Now that this project is a reality, we need to start delivering. So I feel like you and I spend a lot more time together than we did 2 years ago, which is a good thing. But really, just the focus needs to continue throughout, you know, construction and the life of the project, because as you say, that social license, it's something that can go away as easily or easier than building it, right? So you need to maintain that. So the focus needs to stay there. The commitment needs to continue. So that's really important. And then just on the environmental piece, absolutely. We didn't talk about that, but so much time we invested with all the communities that are part of our environmental assessment certificate process. But I'm just thinking about Haisla and how much time we spent on understanding, you know, you talked about harvesting on the shoreline and LNG carriers traveling through Principe Channel, and what do the wakes look like? So doing wake studies, working to understand what those concerns are, and then investing in the studies and the work and the sharing of information so that your community, your harvesters, your fishermen can feel comfortable with the process, talking about mitigations. Is it an escort tug from Triple Island down? Is it slower speeds, marine mammal studies, all this work that goes into it, but it's so important. and hearing what your concerns are, and then actually meaningfully trying to address them, and also demonstrating, providing information, right? So there's understanding exactly of what this looks like, and even taking communities out to visit LNG vessels or LNG facilities and those sorts of things we've invested in, because seeing is believing, right? So just a few other pieces I wanted to add. Thanks.
I could just add to that as well. Another part to our relationship is holding each other accountable, and I'll use my community as an example of that. The accountability of on moving forward. So, as I mentioned earlier, doing a lot of work with the province and the federal government to make sure that there's policies in place that move forward the Indigenous agenda with regards to the hiring of Indigenous people, making sure that there are resources available for education and training, but more importantly, for the companies that are in this room, the number one thing that they want is to make sure that the people that they hire are skilled up. The last thing that they want is for people that don't have the skills and they have to make a whole lot of investment in, and find that they leave after the investment is actually done. In our case, as an example, I was called on that the other day, and by, unfortunately, social media, which here I am pushing for standards of training and programs with the province and the companies, and to have them invest in those kinds of pieces for our Indigenous communities. And then one of the training programs basically called me, and I know that she didn't do that on purpose. She basically just put it out there, and I felt that I had to respond, because one of my biggest things is ensuring that Indigenous people are trained up, as well as getting the jobs that are with these major projects. So our people didn't have the licenses, the driver's license. So as many of our First Nations communities don't have a driver's license. And this, with heavy equipment operators, they needed individuals with driver's license. Anyway, to hold each other's accountable, especially when there's social media these days, they hold me accountable as well. So we have to ensure, as Indigenous people, that our people have the skills and the training necessary for them to be able to do the kind of jobs that are out there. And so not only do we push the companies and the province and the feds, but we too have to be accountable in terms of how we relate directly with the company. And I think that we've done a fairly good job with LNG Canada. I don't think there's been a day that Michael and I have had to put the boxing gloves on, but it's been relatively smooth. However, there's been some tough negotiations as well.
Yeah, which is, I think, it's important for people to recognize that's a part of the relationship, right? If you have the foundation, it's inevitable that in any relationship you're going to have tough conversations, right? But if you build a relationship of trust and respect, then I think that helps you to work through those issues and keep coming back to the table to continue to work them, right? That's my sense anyway.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I'm not sure how many people have ever visited the region, but when I first went there, you truly understand how small you are. It's truly spectacular. And as I spent some time there over the last couple of years, I'm a small town boy, and Kitimat, we fit like a glove. But as time goes on, over the last couple of years, I'm starting to see development and things change. And the question for you, Chief, how do you see the region changing, and how do you hope to keep the culture and that beauty sacred?
That's a tough one, because we rely on our sea resources. We're out on an island. That's how I got my wife, by the way, who happens to be Métis. She actually, when I proposed to her, I said, if we get married, I'll take you to an island in the Pacific. And we're married. We've been married now for 48 years. So I think the island in the Pacific really helped out on that one. But anyway, it is beautiful. As I sit in my office and I look out the window, we're watching the whales go by. We're watching the sea otters actually playing in the kelp beds. And then, during salmon season, we're watching the salmon just jump. So those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure that don't get disturbed, by noise pollution, extra ships coming and going. And it's everything. And if there's an oil spill, that, devastates our clam beds, our cockles, seaweed, everything else that is our food. And so we want to make sure that the environment is still number one. And we have a population of 2,000 people, and I tell you, they really hold our feet to the fire if they see things that are out of turn. And then in turn, it's our turn, to talk to industry as well as to the province and the feds to make sure that there's no devastation to the area. Haida Gwaii, which is probably more known to you than my community, it's a very pristine area. And they're one that we stand behind as well, and they stand behind us to make sure that there's no devastation to our territory. So environment is number one. And a few years ago, the province said, we'll pave your roads. But what we would like to do is to have the ferry dock at your community. And our elders and our older people said, no. They gave up paved roads for their privacy, because as ferry docks, everybody gets off, and then they becomes more of a tourist attraction later on. So they basically said, no, we want to maintain our ways. But through industry and other partners, we were able to pave our road anyway. So.
Thank you. One final question for both of you. More of a personal question. Looking back over the last few years with this project, what was that one defining moment when you realized the scale of the project and how many people it would affect, not only in your own community, but Canadians? I know where I was when they announced FID. I was in Kitimat, and I realized this sleepy little town's about to change. What was that one moment?
Chief's looking at me. So, 7 years on the project, there's probably been a few of those moments, but certainly for FID, around FID, when we knew that the announcement was coming and it was real. And then, as I said earlier, that the sort of personal pressure that you feel, professional as well, recognizing that all the things that we talked about are now going to materialize, both in terms of project-related impacts and then also the opportunities, right? So it's about, now this is real, this is really happening. It's changing the lives of people in the Northwest, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And we have an obligation and a responsibility, and we need to live up to that. So just that recognition around the time of the announcement, having the Prime Minister there, having the Premier there, as well as some Indigenous leaders, and just knowing how important this was and how it was real and that we need to deliver. So that for me was a pretty momentous personal time for me, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
I think for Crystal Smith and Chief Crystal Smith and myself, Chief Crystal Smith with Haisla and myself with Haisla, it's not over yet until we have that social license. And so there is a bit of a snag in the coastal gas link that we're working through. We're trying as much as we can to make sure that the concerns of our Indigenous communities are taken into account. It is a large project. We have a First Nations LNG alliance for the province of British Columbia, and we're working with them. I'm on the board with them as well to make sure that the alliance, the LNG piece continues to move forward, and that the environmental impacts are mitigated. So on the environmental piece, I would hazard to guess that the Indigenous communities and the Métis communities are probably pretty much no different than we are. We have a Gitratla environmental monitoring group, and that group right now is in a deficit, only because we want to make sure that everything that's happening at the ground level is actually taken into consideration as we're moving forward. So, you know, I just don't want to understate how important the environment is to our people, and that those need to be clearly answered before Indigenous communities move forward on any of the agreements that we have. So it's, I saw some photos up here in terms of the, you know, your beautiful territory around here. It's gorgeous, you know, it's no different than where we're at, you know, and we want to make sure that we maintain that. But the benefits, though, that we're looking at is, can we actually receive benefits? Our elders, by the way, gave up. There's a lot of our Indigenous communities that provide royalties to their individual members. Our elders and our members gave that up for our legacy projects. You know, we have a trust fund that is mainly run by the younger generation. We have a youth council that actually works with our elected chief and council and our hereditary table to ensure that we look out for you know, the seventh generation of people yet to come. And that's important for us. So in terms of the outlook on, you know, a 40-year project, that's one project. But we're asking our people, don't look at the projects for project's sake. Don't get a job for the project. You know, develop a career. Find what the career path is. So we have our people who are working on education, training, skills, and employment that you know, LNG Canada has helped us out greatly on very early on, and we developed an essential skills. So even those who are going into post-secondary, we run them through our essential skills project, so that we run them through a barrier of tests to see whether or not they have the skills to be able to make it academically within a college, university setting, rather than just throwing them in there and saying, you know, go to it. And we also have that process now that we've built in, where we follow them right from the date of their application to when the, you know, throughout their life. We basically call it, we look after those who are yet to be born to those who are deceased. And if any one of you have attended any of our ceremonies, you find that the entry into the spirit world is a sacred process for us as well. So death is a process that we take very seriously, and we work with our overall community to make sure that they're in a part of this overall process. So, and I don't think that there's any other Indigenous community that's very much different. So for the companies, just to they all do respect that on going in and working with the communities and making sure that their needs are respected. And we too, on the other hand, we respect the companies that are coming in, but we also ask them to make sure that they ensure that the needs of the community are taken into hand. And so it's not like we just leave the elders and the adults out in the cold. We're working with them. One of the things that we're working with LNG Canada is we have elders who guide the process. So if there are people that are falling off the rail with regards to employment, we have elders that they can go directly to, talk with them, and if there's treatment required, we work through the elders. And if our people are trying to get their children back, our elders are a huge part of that on getting our children back. And so the overall community is taken into consideration when we're doing any partnerships with anyone. And we take those partnerships very seriously, and that's why we're asking that when you're looking at Indigenous communities, you look at the long-term relationship, and you start building that out right from today onward, and respecting each other's, because it's reciprocal on both sides.
Thank you. As an outsider looking in, you guys have been inspirational. The work that you've done, second to none. I wish Crystal would have been here as well to share. I'm just happy I reached out for you guys to share your story. I'd like to thank you for attending, and thank the audience for coming to hear the story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the engaging panel, and we've learned so much this past half an hour. I appreciate LNG Canada and the Gitgala, now I can pronounce it, First Nation being here today. I think that it's really important, as one of the panel members had said, the obligation to live up to these opportunities. And that is a good way to summarize some of the partnerships in moving forward. Today is Anti-Bullying Day, so for those of you that are wearing pink, kudos to you. Yes, I didn't get the memo, but I think if you put red and white together, it becomes pink. So anyways, I wanted to make mention that we are going into a morning refreshment break, and our next session will begin at 10:45 a.m. And I am hoping that you guys could, again, I know that I'd mentioned this morning, but for those that weren't here, to check out the exhibition and then the Indigenous Artisan Fair just up the stairs. So I look forward to coming back and having another, of course, panel here. We look forward to it, and have a wonderful morning break. Thank you.